There's a feeling a lot of people have right now that they can't quite name. It's not panic, it's not fear exactly. It's more like that moment when you're driving and something feels slightly wrong with the car, a sound, a vibration, something subtle, and you can't decide if you're imagining it or if you should pull over. Most people keep driving. I want to talk to you today about 5 specific signs that something larger is building beneath the surface of everyday life. Not conspiracy theories, not doom predictions, just patterns. Patterns that have shown up before every major disruption in modern history. Patterns that most people only recognize in hindsight, sitting in the middle of a crisis thinking, I should have seen this coming. Here's what makes this conversation different from most. These signs aren't hidden. They're not classified. They're sitting in plain sight, in the grocery store, in your utility bill, in the way certain conversations have quietly shifted over the last 18 months. The question isn't whether the signs are there. The question is whether you're the kind of person who pays attention to them. By the end of this, you're going to look at a few ordinary things very differently. And one of these signs, the 4th one, is something almost nobody is connecting to the bigger picture. Let's get into it. Sign 1. The price of ordinary things is sending a signal. Most people miss. Here's what most people think when prices go up. They think it's temporary. They think it'll correct itself. And sometimes it does. But there's a specific pattern of price behavior that historically precedes larger systemic stress. And it's different from normal inflation in one very important way. Normal inflation is broad and gradual. What we're seeing in certain categories right now is sharp, uneven, and concentrated in the things that matter most. Food staples, fuel, and basic building materials. When eggs tripled in price, most people blamed the bird flu outbreak and moved on. But the bird flu was the trigger, not the cause. The cause was a supply chain with no redundancy, no buffer, and no margin for error. The trigger just exposed it. We saw the same pattern in the lead up to the 2020 shortages. Prices on specific items spike weeks before the shelves actually emptied. The price was the early warning system, and almost nobody read it that way. The tactical advice here is simple. Start paying attention to price as a signal, not just a cost. When the price of a basic staple doubles in a short window, ask why. Not politically, but logistically. Where does this come from? How many steps does it take to get here? What happens if one of those steps breaks? Imagine standing in the grocery store 6 months from now, looking at a shelf that used to hold something your family eats every week, and it's just gone. Not expensive, gone. The price spike you ignored 3 months earlier was the system telling you something. Most people don't speak that language. You can learn it, but price is just the surface. The next sign goes deeper into something most people interact with every single day without realizing what it's telling them. Sign 2. The behavior of local institutions is quietly changing. Most people assume that if something serious were coming, the institutions around them would say so clearly. The government would issue a warning. The news would cover it. Someone in authority would tell them it was time to pay attention. Here's what most people miss. Institutions don't announce fragility. They manage it, quietly, incrementally, and in ways that are easy to rationalize as routine. Think about what's happened with utility companies over the last few years. Rolling brownout language has entered their public communications in a way it never used to. Manage load reduction, grid stress events, conservation requests. These aren't alarm bells. They're carefully worded acknowledgments that the system is operating closer to its limits than it used to. During the 2021 Texas freeze, the grid operators knew for years that the system had vulnerabilities in extreme cold. Reports had been written. Recommendations had been made. The institution knew. It just didn't translate that knowledge into public urgency until 4 million people were sitting in the dark in sub-freezing temperatures. The warning signs were there. They were just written in a language most people weren't reading. The tactical advice is to start reading institutional behavior as a signal. When your utility company starts talking about demand response programs and offering you money to let them remotely adjust your thermostat, that's not a customer perk. That's a capacity problem being managed through your household. When local emergency management quietly updates its public preparedness recommendations for the first time in a decade, pay attention to the timing. Imagine getting a letter from your water utility about a voluntary conservation effort during a period of normal rainfall. Most people file it away or throw it out. A few people ask why conservation is being requested when there's no obvious shortage. That second group is reading the signal correctly, but institutions are just one layer. The next sign is more personal, and it's one that's showing up in conversations across the country right now. Sign 3. The people around you are starting to feel it too. Here's a pattern that shows up before every major social disruption. The feeling of unease becomes widespread before the cause of that unease becomes clear. People start changing their behavior in small ways, buying a little more at the grocery store, putting off large financial commitments, talking differently about the future without being able to articulate exactly why. This isn't mass hysteria. It's actually a fairly reliable early indicator. Human beings are social animals with finely tuned threat detection systems. When enough people in a community start feeling that something is off, even without a specific reason, it's worth taking seriously. Right now, with active conflict involving Iran reshaping shipping routes through the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway that handles roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply, the ripple effects aren't staying on the other side of the world. They're showing up in fuel prices, in freight costs, in the quiet anxiety of people who don't follow geopolitics, but somehow feel the pressure anyway. You don't need to understand the details of a conflict 10,000 miles away to feel its weight in your weekly grocery bill. The tactical advice here is to pay attention to the conversations around you without getting swept up in the emotion of them. When your coworker mentions they've been stocking up on a few extra things, when your neighbor asks if you know anything about water storage, when a family member who has never mentioned preparedness starts asking questions, those are data points worth noting. Imagine sitting at a dinner table 6 months from now and someone says, "I had a feeling something like this was coming." The people who acted on that feeling quietly and early are in a very different position than the people who waited for certainty. Certainty in a crisis is always late, but the next sign is the one that most people are completely missing, and it's hiding in something you probably look at every single week. Sign 4. The supply chain is telling you exactly how thin it is. Most people think of the supply chain as an invisible background process. Things appear on shelves. They don't think about how they got there. And that invisibility is exactly what makes this sign so easy to miss. Here's what most people don't realize. The modern supply chain is not designed for resilience. It's designed for efficiency. Those are opposite things. An efficient system runs lean, with minimal inventory, minimal redundancy, and minimal buffer. It works beautifully when everything goes right. It fails fast when anything goes wrong. And right now, several things are going wrong simultaneously. The conflict with Iran has introduced real uncertainty into one of the most critical shipping corridors on the planet. When vessels reroute away from the Persian Gulf, transit times increase, fuel costs spike, and the already thin margins built into global logistics get thinner. We saw a version of this during the Red Sea disruptions of recent years, when a single regional conflict added weeks to shipping timelines and sent freight costs surging. The shelves didn't empty overnight, but the seams started showing in ways that most people dismissed as temporary. The signal that the supply chain is under stress isn't always an empty shelf. Sometimes it's a substitution, a different brand than usual, a smaller package at the same price, a limit to per customer sign that appears without explanation. These are the system showing its limits. The tactical advice is to start mapping your own supply chain for the things that matter most to your household. Where does your food come from? How many steps does it take to get to your table? What's the single point of failure in that chain? You don't need to become an expert. You just need to know enough to recognize when something in that chain is under stress. Imagine walking into your grocery store and noticing that 3 specific items your family relies on are either out of stock or have been replaced by unfamiliar alternatives. Most people shrug and adapt. A few people recognize that pattern as a signal and quietly start making different decisions. That second group is building a picture that the first group won't see until it's complete. But there's one final sign, and this one is the most personal of all. Sign 5. Your own gut has been trying to tell you something. This is the one that's hardest to talk about because it sounds unscientific. But there's actually a significant body of research on what's sometimes called pre-crisis intuition, the way people develop an ability to sense systemic stress before it becomes visible. You don't have to be an expert to have this. Most people who watch content like this have it to some degree. It's why you're here. It's that low-level hum of concern that something is more fragile than it looks, that the normal world is operating on assumptions that haven't been tested recently, that the margin between fine and not fine is thinner than most people realize. And right now, that feeling has more to point to than usual. A regional conflict with the global supply chain implications, energy markets reacting to geopolitical uncertainty, institutions quietly adjusting their language in ways that don't make the evening news. None of it is proof of anything specific. All of it is worth paying attention to. The mistake most people make with this feeling is one of two things. Either they dismiss it as anxiety and push it down, or they let it spiral into paralysis, where the problem feels so large that no individual action seems worth taking. Both responses lead to the same place: unpreparedness. The tactical advice is to treat that feeling as information rather than emotion. It's telling you something, not what specifically and not when, but it's telling you that the gap between where you are and where you'd want to be in a disruption is worth closing. And closing that gap doesn't require a dramatic life change. It requires a series of small, deliberate actions taken consistently over time. Imagine looking back on this moment 1 year from now. The people who took that feeling seriously and acted on it quietly, without drama, without obsession, are in a fundamentally different position than the people who acknowledged the feeling and did nothing. The actions don't have to be large. They just have to be real. The people who navigate hard times aren't the ones who predicted exactly what would happen. They're the ones who built enough margin into their lives that when something unexpected arrived, they had room to respond rather than react. Most people will watch this, feel the weight of it briefly, and move on. That's a choice, and it's one they'll either be grateful for or regret, depending on what the next 12 months look like. You don't need to prepare for everything. You just need to prepare for the things that matter most. If you're serious about being ready, This is where it starts. Stay grounded. Stay aware. I'll see you in the next one.